honored to introduce our first keynote speaker of the 2024 Men of Color Summit. Fabio Tambosi is the Senior Vice President of Global Marketing at ESL Faceit Group. Before he transformed iconic brands such as Nokia, Nike, Adidas, and Saucony across the sports, technology, and gaming industries, he attended Clemson and was a member of our men's soccer team. His international career, spanning 9 countries, has given him a truly global perspective that influences the way he builds high-performing teams, transforms businesses, and teaches the next generation of brand marketers at Clemson as an adjunct professor, a role he has been devoted to since 2016. Tambosi is also an active member of the Erwin Center for Brand Communications Board of Directors. He holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, and he co-hosts the Marketing Marriage podcast with his wife and marketer in crime, Slavka. All the way from Amsterdam, please help me give a warm welcome to Fabio Tambosi.
Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Great. I'm going to take a page what Felicia said earlier before I started with this whole thing. I love what you said about no, Felicia. For me, no is simply the beginning of a conversation. So when you say no, when somebody says no to you, you go, why not? How could we? What if we? And we invite them into a conversation, right? I love what you said, thank you, because it helped me kind of break the ice a little bit. But also, I want to tell you guys, I feel extremely humbling to be here. Being on this stage is one of the biggest selfless acts that you can have, because it has nothing to do with me. I remember back when I was 17 years old and I attended one of these events in Marietta, Georgia. And I got so touched and inspired with the possibilities of what the world could bring to me that I'm so grateful and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you. So let me get into why we're here, right? We're going to talk a lot about today the power of identity and your role of staying true to who you are in your journey. And I'm going to use my life journey and my story to take you with me along the experiences I had that helped me to be here where I am today. Growing up in Brazil, I lived most of my youth unaware there was actually a person of color. And my identity carried no modifiers other than the ones that I created for myself. And if I thought of myself or anything than Fabio, I thought of myself as an athletic person, an outgoing person, and a confident person, and yes, quite short. And for me, those modifiers, they were specific to me, and they were modifiers and attributes that you could observe by a direct contact with me. And if it wasn't because I lived in my own world, a world that I thought it would be the same wherever I went, and because I thought that was not just my world, it was the world. And that is when I had the first time to experience what that looked like when I stepped outside my own world. And I moved to Marietta, Georgia as an exchange student, and then later as a soccer player at Clemson University. And as a soccer player at a Clemson University, it was something that it was so unique and so special to me that I was starting to notice that there was not a lot of people there that looked like me. And if it wasn't for being on the field or in that uniform, if you were to ask me what color I represent, you would have been orange and purple. My identity was so tied to the uniform, and to being an athlete, that it insulated me on campus for being perceived as a short, brown guy from somewhere in South America, I think. Right? And because of me being an athlete, it was such a big part of my identity. And it was how I saw myself and how many other people tended to see me. And because that was what I confidently and relentlessly projected into the world, this is something that everybody saw me as Fabio, the soccer player from Brazil. In 2003, I went through one of the biggest inflection points of my life. I was watching the MLS Super Draft with my teammates, wondering what would be the next club that would be part of my phase of my soccer career. But what happened is my name wasn't called. And then I was looking back and trying to figure out that what I was going to do with my life when my aspirations of becoming a professional soccer player had vanished. And with it, it went a huge and long-standing part of my identity. And for that, I then had to find myself back home. Within 3 months, I was back in Brazil working as a bartender. And it was a long 2 years until I realized that my identity had never really changed. But that identity, that I was still Fabio, the soccer player, no longer fitted with my circumstances. It no longer fitted with the perspective of the world that I lived in. And when I realized the things that made me successful in soccer, my drive, my focus, and my resilience, they were not exclusive to the soccer field. And then I decided at that moment in time to channel those things into becoming one of the best marketing executives in the world. Yeah, that's right. One of the best. I promise you, I am modest, and that's why I said one of the best. So, and as I set myself to conquer the corporate world, I realized that my identity had evolved because of the new experiences I had, but it was still intact. And despite of the significant shocks that I had in my system, I had to figure something out. I was still me, still Fabio. As you notice, the title of this chapter of my life is entitled. And that's a little bit of deliberate play on words. And this is because it is about my journey into the corporate world, where your job title often shapes how you're perceived and treated, especially in the boardrooms. And trust me, that's a topic for a whole nother conversation. We can talk offline over coffee. Please do come talk to me. But also, it speaks to the fact that at that point in my life, I had to use the world around me in a different way. And I never doubted myself that I was actually entitled to be seen for who I was and for who I am. And I was sure that the world saw me for who I was as a person and judged me for who I was as an individual, and not as a part of some group or a community that I was born into it or identified. But that's actually not true. And when I look back, I can find countless times that I experienced prejudice, profiling, and sometimes harassment. Here's a story for you. Not so long ago, Antonio mentioned, I had the privilege, the luck to live in 9 countries. I was living in Europe as an expat. And part of my package, it was a company car, top-of-the-line SUV, fully loaded with the cool gadgets. And as I was driving home from work, I get pulled over by the police. And the officer comes to me, and his very first question was, are you a documented immigrant or a refugee? Yeah. So I very politely answered, as I handed him my driver's license, said, I'm a permanent resident. He walks back. Then he comes back. He asks me another question. Are you the owner of this vehicle? At that time, it was extremely confusing. I didn't know where he was getting to. But because at that time, I did not see the situation for what it was, my identity both protected and prevented me from seeing as such. And then Black Lives Matter happened. And as someone who is not, by description, or identify as black, it would be ironic for me to say that it changed my life completely. Well, that's not actually true, because it didn't change how I saw myself. It did show me, though, how I was often seen and perceived by others. And as we all went through these horrific examples and experiences of the lives that we're taking and the names that we're going to remember forever, I felt sorrow and sympathy. But it was the voices that emerged through those stories of countless examples of those terrible experiences that we all had to go through that I not only felt sympathy, but I felt empathy. Because these situations also happened to me repeatedly. And not only now I could see for what they truly were, only now did I realize that I was no longer just Fabio. I saw for the first time that I was too also a person of color, and that I was a minority. I lived into my 40s thinking that having to go through a separate room for further questioning 1 out of 3 times as I go through customs at airports around the world was simply the normal human experience. And the stories I heard during that time taught me otherwise. It taught me that they exposed to me that it was through education, it was through understanding what microaggression was, what racial bias was, what gender bias was, that we all play a role in this. That I was working at Adidas at that time, and it was a moment where Adidas was going through one of the hardest internal crises that we had experienced. The company culture was in public scrutiny and a lot of media coverage. And then Adidas decided to take several measures to change and create a more equal playing field for all. And one of the things is that they made a mandatory 6-month program that we all had to go through, and it was part of everybody's bonus compensation structure on racial biases. And then, at that moment in time, I became aware of the experience that I had undergone in my life, and many more that I have never had experienced. And then I realized that I was part of a minority group. And then while my inclusion in this community was not something that I chose, but my participation in would be something that's very much mine to decide. And being at Adidas for that time, I was in a position that I had a lot to say in consumer-facing marketing, in how we go to market, and also, like marketing traditionally is seen as a discipline that you use to sell products. But marketing also, you have the responsibility to position the brand in the minds of the consumers. So at that time, we decided that we shouldn't use marketing and Adidas as a platform only to sell products. And we decided to lend the brand as a platform to tell other stories and other voices. I'm going to play you a video of one of the campaigns or messages that we developed at that time that hold close to my heart, and then we'll talk about it in a little bit.
A lot of people start skating because they run away from things that they deal with in their homes or certain situations and stuff like that. But skateboarding, when you're doing it, you don't have a care in the world. You're just having fun. You're not really thinking about what's going on in the real world. But we do live in a world where racism exists, and I think we're at a time now where ignoring it is no longer an option. This has been going on. This isn't the first thing. So many people have been choked out and shot and killed and lynched and burned on fire. This isn't the first thing. This is just the biggest thing, because I think for the people who get left behind, kids and people's families and moms and dads, I think that the justice system has failed to give consequences to those who take innocent lives for no reason. That's why the world was set on fire. We shouldn't, be wanted just because now. Black people been talented. We've been smart, we've been inventing things, we've been here, and it's sad to see that the world is acting like we just came out. It should have been equal. We should be treated fairly from the beginning of time. What gives me hope is seeing people outside with their signs, white, black, red, blue, yellow. It doesn't matter color. Everyone is tired of it. No one likes it. It's not right. And all voices is louder than one, and pressure busts pipes. So if the world keeps applying the pressure, then I believe we will be heard.
I think we can all agree that Tyshawn's word is pretty compelling. But the question I ask myself, what does it have to do with identity? Especially, what does it have to do with my identity? If you remember, going back to the education that we went through at Adidas, that moment in time, it raised my awareness about the role that I had to play, the responsibility that came with being part of that. And for me, this is the place where that part now became a big part of my identity. And I was very proud of it. So let me be clear, and this is crucial. I'm not saying that it defined me, but now it changed in how I would describe myself to the world. And now I felt a much stronger sense of belonging, and I felt like I found my community, my space, and my place. And one of the things that, as you become part of that movement and part of the identity, and while this becomes part of who you are, the communities you choose to be part of it. For example, Clemson is a community that I choose to be part of it for all the right reasons. We're pretty freaking awesome, right? But also, one of the things that, it is really important for all of us to know is that the only thing that is yours is your identity. Your identity is yours to choose. So when you decide to use your identity as a conduit and as a means to serve your community, I can guarantee you that the best service that you can do is bring the full force of your identity, the full force of who you are, not some generic form of services. Find that service that only you can give. And this is where I want to start bringing us home. As I wrap this up again, I want to tell you one more story that happened to me that I did not understand at that time, didn't make much sense, but I think about a lot. And it was a time when I was actually coming to Clemson to teach, and I was coming from overseas. I was tired, and I was jet-lagged, and yes, again, airports. And as I went through customs, I was asked by the immigration officer, "What is the purpose of your trip?" I said, "Hey, I'm here to teach." And I handed him over a letter from the dean. He looked at me and said, "You don't look like a teacher." So at that time, I was jet-lagged. I was like, what does a teacher look like? Well, as you can imagine, I was quickly ushered to prove the statistics of 1 out of 3. "Please, sir, follow me." So we go, and I'm sitting there in the small room, waiting for the officer to come back. And then I would hear, "Are you Fabio?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Did you go to Clemson?" "Yes, sir. I played soccer there." "Oh, man, I went to Farman. I played football there, and my roommate was Clint Dempsey." "Yeah, I know Clint." "Welcome back, sir. Enjoy your trip. Here's your passport back." So, for the longest time of my life, I thought my connections were actually what made the difference. So the letter from the dean should have resolved that. But actually, what made the real difference was my identity, is how I projected myself into the world, how I behaved, how I acted, right? And as some brown, skinny guy with a funny accent, I was treated with suspicion, a little bit of disrespect, right? And I'm not saying that this was my fault by any means, and far from it. What I'm trying to say is that really the only thing I can offer you, and what I can offer you is what I found to be true and valuable to me, and I hope you can find some value for you, is that wherever you go in your life, the circumstances will be different. You might be amongst friends, you might be among strangers, but the only constant will always be you. And your identity, not what you represent to those who do not know you, but who you are at your core and know yourself to be, can not only be your armor in situations that may seek to dehumanize you, but your identity can actually be the decisive factor on how your experience will unfold. Thank you.